Okay, so I actually think this book is I never say this, but I mean it. I think this book is going to have a big effect on the course of the country. And the reason I think that is because you two are the perfect people to write it. And so I never do this, but I just want to start with your bios. So your siblings, Casey and Calley, you happen to have grown up in the same neighborhood as me in Washington, like blocks from me. So I know the world that you're from. You're writing about food, nutrition, the regulatory bodies that are poisoning the country. You are a lobbyist and you are a Stanford-educated physician. I just want to go through quickly each one and starting with you. You're a doctor.
Yes.
Tell us the progression of your thinking on this and what it did to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So trained at Stanford Medical School, then became trained as a head and neck surgeon.
Undergrad Stanford also.
Undergrad Stanford, medical school at Stanford, then went on to train in head and neck surgery. Yes. 9 years into my postgraduate training.
How did you do in medical school and college?
Did well, was president of my Stanford class, graduating, taught my class with honors in medical school, and went on to a very competitive surgical subspecialty. Head and neck.
So I'm just saying that because normally I dismiss credentials out of hand, but these are real credentials and they matter, I think, to your credibility. Okay.
And I did what every good little medical student, wants to do, which is climb the ranks of that academic ladder. But, you
killed it.
Did well,
yeah.
And I got to the top of that mountain, right? 9 years into my postgraduate training. And I looked around me and I realized that, patients in America are getting destroyed. Children, adults, the elderly. You're so distracted in your little surgical subspecialty, focusing on the ear, nose, and throat where I was, and you get distracted. You look around at what's happening in Americans, and our health is getting worse every single year. Patients in America are getting much sicker every year, more depressed. We're getting infertile, and life expectancy is going down in a country that's spending almost 2x more than any other country in the world.
So before we get into the details of what you did, tell us, of why you did what you did. Yeah. Tell us what you did. So you spent your whole life working toward this goal. You reach the top, and then you decide not to do it?
Yeah. I'm in the operating room in my 5th year of my surgical residency, and I'm looking down at a patient in front of me who's on our 3rd revision sinus surgery. And, I know how to diagnose her. I know how to write the prescriptions. I know how to do the surgery. But what I kind of realized in that moment was I have no idea why this patient's actually sick. She has so many other health issues, prediabetes, arthritis. She's got some brain fog. She's got obesity, and she's got this sinus issue. And in my training, I was never, ever, ever taught to look at the whole patient, to look at how all these things are connected. And I was only taught how to, do the surgery and then bill for it. And I realized that there's a huge problem in how we're practicing medicine right now, which is we're ignoring the root causes of why Americans are sick. And we're profiting off of patients getting sick and then doing things to them. That's the way the business model of healthcare works. The way that healthcare, which is the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States, makes money is you have more patients in the system having more things done to them for longer periods of time. And when I kind of put some of these pieces together and realized that my training had totally, essentially incapacitated me from really understanding why patients are sick and how to actually help them thrive, I actually had to walk away from the surgical world because I realized that I was going to be making money off of essentially not spending time helping patients understand their health and actually just profiting off their illness.
So 9 years into medical training at Stanford, you gave it up voluntarily. On my birthday, 30th birthday, I walked into the office of the chair of the department and I put down the scalpel and I walked away and I devoted my life to why are Americans getting sicker every year? Why are 50% of American children dealing with a chronic health issue? This was less than 1% 50 years ago. Why is our health getting destroyed the more that we spend? And so that's what did they say when you walk into your colleagues at Stanford and say, I'm giving it up at 30?
It wasn't really a conversation. I knew that I couldn't cut into one more person until I understood why Americans are getting sicker every single year. I think that the unfortunate thing is that doctors don't really understand because every level of our education is systematically focused on blinding us from thinking about root causes. We have over 100 medical and surgical subspecialties right now. And how you make money in the American healthcare system is you take a patient with 10 different issues and you send them to 10 different specialists, put them on 10 different meds, maybe they eventually have 10 different surgeries. You never actually are taught how to put the pieces together, look at the whole body as a system, which of course it is. And part of this is because, who are the people underwriting our our medical education, it's the pharmaceutical companies. We are taught how to be very algorithmic and robotic in how we look at patients. And so ultimately I left the surgical world and I went down the rabbit hole of asking why. Why are we getting sicker every year?
It's just such a radical move to do something like that.
Yeah. I mean,
your whole life you're working toward a goal and then you give it up?
Yeah.
After 9 years?
Yeah. This is the thing that I understood and that I am working and we are spending our lives to evangelize this book, Good Energy, is that the reasons why Americans are getting sicker every year are very simple. Americans want to be healthy. Americans do not want to die early. They do not want to see their kids with all these chronic health issues like autism and food allergies and obesity and prediabetes and 40% of teens with mental health issues. No one wants this, but the system is rigged against the American patient to create diseases and then profit off of them. This is happening across almost every lever of our major industries, from processed food to tech to pharma. And so really what Americans need to understand is that these trends can stop immediately. We need to understand why we're sick, which is our primarily our toxic food system and the ways that systematically several industries are profiting off of our addiction and illness. And if we can understand that and create very simple top-down and bottom-up strategies to address it, Americans will become rapidly healthier. And so as a physician, I took an oath to do no harm, and I took an oath to help patients thrive. And so the way that we can do that is by helping people understand the levers of corruption that are essentially keeping us sick.
I guess the reason I'm pressing you, and you're the sort of person, this is a compliment, clearly doesn't want to talk about herself, which is great. But I think it's relevant because it speaks to the intensity of your commitment and to your sincerity. So you're giving up the prize, you're giving up the money because you really believe this.
Yes.
And I think I just want to establish that at the outset.
Thank you.
Before we say anything more. So you're her brother, you're very close, I happen to know that. Mm. And you're obviously proud of your sister. She, president of her class at Stanford. It's the kind of thing like, oh, my sister's at Stanford. She's at Stanford Medical School. She decides not to practice surgery, the most impressive of all specialties. What's your reaction to this?
I called her and said she was a complete idiot. We were raised in Washington, D.C., right next to you, kind of conditioned to climb up the ladder.
Of course.
I went to Stanford. I went to Harvard Business School. That was what life is about, just kind of collecting those credentials. Casey, research at the NIH, as we talked about, top of her Stanford med school class. To me, that was it. And truly, and you hit on this, she had this is her life. This was her identity. This is everything to her. And she bravely stepped away with no plan, just from a moral obligation. And I thought she was a complete idiot. And what I know now, and what I've been radicalized on, is she has convinced me that this is the most important issue in the country. It's an issue of corruption that starts at Stanford Med School being 50% funded by pharma and not training doctors on one nutrition class. Stanford Med School, Harvard Med School, 90% of med schools don't offer or require one nutrition class. Doctors simply aren't learning why people are getting sick, which we'd all assume they do. 80% of the course loads in pharmacology. It's on how to take people that are getting sicker and sicker and manage those conditions, not to cure them. And that's a huge problem because that dynamic of the largest industry in the country is destroying human capital.
So as your sister is on one end of the equation, you're on the other. So you both have, you're from a community of strivers. That's what DC is.
Exactly.
And merit badge gatherers. And you've gotten two of the greatest merit badges ever.
Right.
HBS, Stanford Medical School. But you're all of a sudden finding yourself in Washington. Can you just explain your background a little bit?
Yeah. So Casey was a bit smarter than me on the biology route. I wanted to be contributing to politics from an early age, and went to Stanford to go back into politics. Studied economics, political science, went straight back to campaigns after school. What I learned quickly is that then campaigns over, you work for the biggest spenders in DC, and I found myself across the desk from food industry and the farm industry. The farm industry spends 5 times more in DC than the oil industry. By far the biggest spender. Bipartisan, you're working for pharma. But starting with food, I learned early on that the food industry, and this is my construct, the food industry and the processed food industry was created by the cigarette industry. And I think this is very telling. It's something I learned. So in the 1990s, the 2 largest food companies in the world were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. What happened is when the Surgeon General way too late in the 1980s said cigarettes were maybe problematic, these were some of the largest companies in the world with the largest cash piles of any company in the world. So what they did is they used their cash piles to buy food companies. We think about the 80s as the Wall Street era M&A, a lot of deals. The two biggest M&A deals up until 1990 in world history were cigarette companies buying food companies. So you had in the 90s, these two cigarette companies very strategically do two things. They shifted their thousands of scientists who were experts at making cigarettes addictive to the food department. So we had the rise of ultra-processed food where our food now is a science experiment. The second thing they did is they shifted their lobbying. So the cigarette industry, of course, was the biggest, lobbying spenders and had a good playbook. They shifted their playbook on lobbying and rigging institutions of trust to food. So they created the food pyramid. So the cigarette industry, through the food companies they bought, paid off the FDA, the USDA, Harvard to create reports saying sugar doesn't cause obesity. And they lobbied for the food pyramid in the 1990s, we all remember, which said, animal-based fats are bad, carbs are good. Remember, carbs and sugar were basically the base of the pyramid. So the American diet, because of that, because we trust our medical institutions, which they know, we shifted our diet significantly to ultra-processed food. It was very intentional, the food pyramid. That was a ultra-processed food marketing document that carbs were fine, sugar was fine. And that shifted, and you look at dietary patterns. Today, a child diet is 70% ultra-processed food. Now, what does that mean, right? Those are literally foods invented by the cigarette industry to addict kids. Obviously we've got sugar, but there's thousands of different ingredients and science concoctions that scientists work in a lab to make it more palatable, to make it more addictive. So food consumption, calorie consumption has skyrocketed. And the byproduct of these toxic ingredients that the cigarette industry I watched and helped with this, bought off the USDA, bought off the FDA, is they wreak havoc among our cells. The foundation of our diet is ingredients that we aren't biologically made to eat, that didn't exist 100 years ago. The foundation of our diet is three things when you look at any label. It's added sugar, processed sugar, which basically didn't exist 100 years ago. It's just from natural sources. Ultra-processed grains, which were invented 100 years ago. The processing takes the fiber off. They're basically hidden sugars, devoid of nutritional value. And seed oils. Seed oils are the top source of American calories. And this is actually
seed oils are the top source of American calories.
Soybean oil, canola oil. This is the baseline of American calories right now. And these seed oils were actually created by John D. Rockefeller as a byproduct of oil production. It's basically engine lubricant. And the Rockefeller and those aligned with them actually lobbied to have this suitable for human consumption. That's how seed oils came into the American diet. They're much cheaper, but they're highly inflammatory. And just by definition, just at the highest level, these ingredients and all the chemicals we can't name that are in ultra-processed food are not natural ingredients that our bodies are made to handle. So there's, as we talk about in Good Energy, this produces a lot of side effects to our cells. The food industry isn't trying to kill Americans. They're trying to make food cheap and addictive. And what I learned, in the morning meeting with the food companies, trying to lobby and influence the USDA, being the lifeblood of nutrition research, paying off, nutrition research at Harvard and Stanford as a junior employee, shocked by that.
So you saw that?
Oh, my first week, as working for these industries, it was a list of top professors. And the food industry pays 11 times more for foundational nutrition research than the NIH. You go to any nutrition school in the country, the lifeblood of their school, they'll proudly admit this is from the processed food industry. In the past 2 years, there's been 50,000 peer-reviewed research studies on nutrition. We're the only animal that has peer-reviewed nutrition studies, and we're the only animals that are systematically obese, diabetic, and being crippled by metabolic dysfunction. We're born with an innate sense of knowing what's right for us. The problem very strategically, and this is well known among the industry, is that ultra-processed food does, because they're able to do this science experiment with our food, it hijacks our biology, it hijacks our satiety signals. High fructose corn syrup, fructose, it makes us want to eat more. Because in the wild, when you see a bunch of fruit out there, you're well advised to eat it, historically. We've basically rigged our biology to hijack our signals that, make us satiated. So that's what ultra-processed food does. So That's the food industry, okay? The food industry actually, with their own set interests, want to make food addictive and cheaper. It kind of makes sense. The criminal devil's bargain is that it's highly tied to the healthcare industry. And as Casey said, the fastest growing industry in America right now isn't AI. It's not tech, it's healthcare. It's the largest and fastest growing industry. And just as a statement of economic fact, the best thing for that industry is a child getting sick. When a child gets sick, or any American gets sick with a chronic condition, with diabetes, obesity, kidney disease, heart disease, whatever, they go on a lifetime medication. They go on the metformin, they go on the statin, they have lifetime treatments, and they keep racking up more comorbidities. If you're diabetic, you have an average of 4 other comorbidities. So you keep racking up, but you don't die, you just suffer. You inevitably get infertility, depression. You start racking them up. So that's very good for the medical system to have these chronic conditions that need to be managed. Just from a pure economic standpoint, that's how the system's set up. That's all happening largely because of our food system and other metabolic habits we can talk about, but largely because of our rise of ultra-processed food that's really hacking our cells and really hijacking our cells. The criminal part, the devil's bargain, is that the healthcare system, you'd expect to be speaking out about why we're getting so sick, but they're not only silent on the reasons, they don't only train Casey the first day of Stanford Med School that we're basically taking it as a given that people are lazy and going to get sick, we're just going to profit from treating them. They're silent on that. They're actually complicit. Working for Coke, I helped steer money to the American...
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, working for Coca-Cola, they actually pay money to the American Diabetes Association. They actually pay money to the American Academy of Pediatrics. If there's one thing the American Diabetes Association, which sets the standard of care for diabetes management, should be doing, they should be saying, we're not going to accept money from Coke, which is diabetes water. They accept money from Coke. So there's
that's like Tyson Chicken subsidizing PETA.
Right.
You know, it doesn't kind of make any sense.
It doesn't make sense.
For 35 years, Liberty Safe has been the #1 manufacturer of safes made in this country, American made, from start to finish. They make high-quality gun safes. I've got one. Vault doors, home safes, handgun vaults, whatever you need to protect the things you value. And again, I can tell you from personal experience, these guys know what they're doing. I use Liberty safes for the things that I don't want stolen, the things that really matter. My father's shotguns, the documents that I've got to have, and a lot more. I'm not going to tell you what else, but you need one. Crime rates are way up. And if you have anything you would like to protect, that you need to protect, Liberty Safes is the way to do it. Now, Liberty Safe has over 350 dealers nationwide who specialize in delivery and installation and answering any questions you have. If you've got somebody to protect, they've got a way to protect it. Visit libertysafe.com, pick out what you need, and be sure to use the code TUCKER at checkout to let them know that we sent you. They'll take care of the rest. Liberty Safe is a product we fervently believe in. With Liberty Safe, you are always protected. Wait, so okay, thank you. So you work for Coca-Cola, you were at Stanford Medical School, and both of you have converged on what I think is a kind of evangelism. I say that as a compliment. And this book is the result of that. What can you just give us the baseline condition of health in the United States?
Absolutely. So the word I used earlier, destroyed, is not hyperbolic in any way, shape, or form. 74% of American adults now are overweight or obese. Close to 50% of children are overweight or obese. 120 years ago, when someone was obese, there were case reports written about it.
Yes.
Literally, there were people in the circus if you had obesity.
Sideshow fat. Yeah, it was so unusual.
It was so unusual. It is now 74% of our country. 77% of young adults are unfit to serve in the military because of these issues like obesity. Now let's talk about diabetes. 50%, a full 50% of American adults have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, which is a fundamental issue in how our cells... Half the country, Tucker, have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, and 30% of teens now have prediabetes. This was a condition that no pediatrician would have seen in their lifetime 50 years ago. 1% of Americans in 1950 had type 2 diabetes. We have 18% of teens with fatty liver disease, a disease that used to be in late stage alcoholics. Cancer rates are skyrocketing in the young and the elderly. Young adult cancers are up 79%. And this is the first year in American history we're estimated to have over 2 million cases of cancer. 25% of American women are on an antidepressant medication 40% of 18-year-olds have a mental health diagnosis. We have the highest infant and maternal mortality rate in the entire developed world, despite spending 2x on infant and maternal care than any other country. So you have a higher risk of dying as a woman giving birth in America than any other developed country in the world. Autism rates in kids are 1 in 36 nationally. This was 1 in 1,500 in the year 2000, and the screening has not changed in California, where I live.
And I just want to linger on that. And the screening has not changed. So
in 20 years,
the definition hasn't changed.
No, 1 in 32 from 1 in 1,500 in California. 1 in 36 right now. It was 1 in 1,500 in California. It's 1 in 22. One of the worst states in the country for autism. So this is just a smattering.
What the hell is that?
And all of these conditions. I mean, and I could go on and on. Autoimmune diseases, infertility is at peak rates. I mean, I don't know how this is not front page news. Infertility is going up 1% per year. Sperm counts are going down 1% per year since the 1970s. Sperm counts are down
continuing
50%,
to drop?
Continuing to drop.
At an increasing rate. Our bodies are crying out for help.
26% of women have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, the thing that people need to understand is that all of these conditions are caused or driven by the exact same thing, which is metabolic dysfunction, this core foundational issue of how our bodies on the cellular level function, which is driven by our toxic food system and our toxic environment. These subtle, insidious forces that are creating slow, progressive illness starting now in fetal life that allow patients to be profitable and on the pharma treadmill for their entire lives. They make us sick, but they don't kill us, and then we are drugged for life. You look at what's happening in children. A child born in a hospital in the United States today, within hours of coming from source into this, into this body, the first thing that happens to them is pharmaceutical intervention. Without really asking, there's barely informed consent about this. That child's eyes are smeared with erythromycin ointment, and they're given a hepatitis B vaccine in their first day of life. And what are these two things for? I mean, I mention this because it's just emblematic of how we're put on the pharma treadmill from the moment we are born in this country for reasons that are very strange. The erythromycin ointment is to prevent chlamydial infections of the eye, which we test women for chlamydia. So why would every baby in the United States need this ointment if the mom doesn't have it? And the Hep B vaccine is for hepatitis B, which is a sexually transmitted disease and IV drug user disease, of course, which babies are not going to be exposed to. And yet every single baby in America is getting the intervention. So from literally the day we are born, we're on this treadmill.
So, why not test the pregnant mother for those?
They do.
Okay, so
they give it to the women who, even if they have tested negative,
which
they
would
give
be
it to
the overwhelming majority.
Absolutely.
So I don't understand, why would you treat a child on his first day of life for illnesses for a fact he doesn't have and isn't going to get?
So this is what I saw working for pharma. So let's get out of the passion of this debate and just talk about the economic incentives. Let's take the Hep B. Okay. There's actually no dynamic in American capitalism like the vaccine schedule, because the second you get something on that schedule, the government's paying hundreds of billions of dollars for a product that's then mandated for every single American living. So I'm just speaking again, let's not even get into the efficacy of vaccines.
No, we're talking math
from an academic.
Math.
I'm talking math. Working with the pharma industry, it's a huge economic imperative to get more and more vaccines on the schedule. You couldn't watch the Olympics this past couple weeks ago without seeing just ad after ad for actually new vaccines. This is big business, right? Hundreds of billions of dollars. And again, once you get it approved, what happens? It's paid for everyone. And you have the most trusted institutions in the world calling anyone a war criminal for even asking a question about it. So this is well known by the industry.
And can I just say, so this will appear on all kinds of different social media platforms, but maybe the biggest is YouTube, owned by Google. And they will censor this. They will demonetize this video. Just so far, you have not attacked vaccines, but you are showing evidence of some skepticism of their efficacy or the need for them. And YouTube will demonetize this video for what you just said. You're a Stanford educated physician, but YouTube has decided you're not allowed to say this.
And I think this is such an important conversation, because I'd ask everyone listening, if they can still listen to this, is why is the media by the way, YouTube and the media are heavily funded by pharma. Pharma is the number one funder of mainstream news media and one of the largest funders, just demonstrably, just factually. It's just a fact for YouTube ads. You can't watch a YouTube video without seeing pharma ads. So just like they're funding and have a direct line, as we talked about this last time, working for these industries. We paid tech companies, we paid media companies, not even to influence consumers, but to have a direct line to them. It's part of the public affairs strategy, right? We know that if we can fund a large part of YouTube's ad budget, we have a direct line of communication to those companies. And then we have studies from Harvard that we've paid for too, saying that it's anti-science to say anything that questions our products, which we can jam down the throats of the people that we now have a direct line of communication
right.
to.
So the direct line is not to consumers. That's of lesser concern. The direct line is to the media companies, so you can affect censorship.
That's right.
Just as an economic fact, 80% of NIH grants have a conflict of interest. There's very little conflict of interest rules for academic studies. So the game is clear. You fund the academic studies and you have the seal of Harvard, the seal of the NIH, saying that these products, these pharmaceutical products are perfect. And then you use those studies to influence the tech companies and the media companies that you've also paid and have a direct line of communication that there's misinformation. Let's get back to Hep B, but I just want to make one macro point. It's the selective outrage. Why are we so concerned about talking about vaccines? Why is it such an impetus from our trusted institutions that you are a horrible parent if you even ask a question about 72 shots to your kids? And why isn't there that level of urgency around childhood nutrition?
Or childhood chronic disease.
Or childhood chronic disease. Why is it, we can't possibly expect parents not to load their kids with a bunch of sugar and all these toxic ingredients? And by the way, those people can't afford whole food. It's actually racist and classist to even suggest people should be able to afford organic food. We can't possibly expect parents, to have non-toxic food. But when it comes to pharmaceutical interventions, there's no price too high. And if you don't follow it to a T, you're a terrible person. Why is it when we have 9 out of 10 killers of Americans are preventable lifestyle conditions, when 95% of medical costs go towards reversible chronic conditions that Casey's talking about, why isn't there that urgency of the medical community educating parents about why people are getting sick? And really the only vitriol, the only thing that's being censored, the only thing that's being enforced from the top down is absolute adherence to pharmaceutical products. Why during COVID, which was a metabolic condition, this was a disease that attacked weak immune systems. This was a disease that only killed people that were overweight or metabolically dysfunctional. Americans died at a much higher rate than European or Asian countries. Why wasn't there the same emphasis on hardening up our immune systems and attacking the root cause of that? And it was all the airtime was around a pharmaceutical solution. This doesn't actually make sense, but it gets to the money. So working for the pharma companies, there's just nothing better than getting on the vaccine schedule. And that should not be a controversial comment, right? If you have a list of drugs that are mandated for every single American and paid for by the government, you want to get on that schedule. So
well,
there's
a
battle.
Controversial comment. It's not allowed. It's a verboten comment. You're not allowed to say that. They will demonetize this video for what you just said.
And I would ask,
what does that tell you?
I would ask the media companies and ask YouTube to have the same passion for childhood chronic disease and nutrition as they do for enforcing unanimity on pharmaceutical injections for kids.
So just to, amen. I couldn't agree more. It's infuriating. It's worse than that. It's evil. Again, video just demonetized. Worth it. But let me ask, so to the specifics of the Hep B shot that I'm sure all my 4 children had it. I didn't even know
we had it.
Got it.
We had it too.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
What is there just take the other side for a second. Like, is there a reason that we would do this?
I pushed, I welcome any doctor to respond to this. I pushed leading medical experts on this. I'm like, okay, so a child's born, let's just take the side. The child's born, Hep B is spread by 2 routes, sexually transmitted disease or intravenous needles. So my 1-day-old isn't going to be having sex or doing heroin right away. So what's the purpose of getting this on the schedule in the first day of life, the first hours of life? And if you push, and I welcome anyone to do this with their doctor, you get to two things. You get to the American patients are too stupid to remember, so we need to do it right away. That's literally like what they say. And then my doctor told me that the child at daycare could trip over a needle that has hepatitis B on it. That's literally what they get to. That a needle could be on the playground, that somebody just did heroin or something, threw the needle down and it has hepatitis B blood on it. I asked the doctor, has there ever been in human history a case of hepatitis B being transferred that way? They said no. That it's only through intravenous needles and sex. So you actually, to steelman this, and again, welcome anyone to respond, there's not actually a scenario, absent of intravenous needles or sex, that a person gets hepatitis B. There is not a reason for this to be given, but it happened, and I saw this. It was a huge investment for this vaccine. It was a huge, huge economic problem, and this shouldn't be controversial. Think about being at these drug companies. You want the drug given out when you've made the investment. So they're able to work with their buddies at the FDA. They're able to use the studies. They're able to, there's this constant feeling in the medical community that the American people are too stupid to ask a question or too stupid to remember to take these important drugs. So there's this argument and momentum to get on the schedule day one, but there's not actually a medical.
And so we haven't even discussed, I think you have proven the point that there's no good reason. The flip side is, are there good reasons not to take it? So let me just ask you, as a physician and a woman of childbearing age, what's your view?
I mean, there's not a single medication that exists that doesn't have side effects, and where there's not some, range of things that can happen when you inject something in the body. And for the Hep B vaccine in particular, I mean, the two of the handful of inactive ingredients are formaldehyde and aluminum, which is a neurotoxin. And of course, they'll say like, oh, for the body weight of the baby, it's negligible, whatever. But when you're getting several shots at one time, these things make a difference. Our bodies are overwhelmed right now with the amount of toxic inputs that are going in, and they're breaking our bodies, right? And so, if it's not necessary for the vast majority of kids to have this at birth, and you could give it to them when they reach teenage years, right? And they're much bigger and their bodies can handle more of these, these chemicals and toxins that are in these shots, then you have to ask yourself, why are we exposing the whole population to potential risk that any pharmaceutical medication will have a risk of side effects if it's not necessary? And that's a question that I think every parent should be able to ask, but like Calley talks about, you follow the money. It's pretty sinister. I mean, you look at the American Academy of Pediatrics and like, who are their main funders? Mead Johnson, who makes formula, the company that makes influenza vaccines, Abbott Nutrition, which makes formula. These people are funding the organization that cherry picks the research to make our pediatric guidelines. Okay, so there's hundreds of thousands of papers that are published every year about the importance of nutrition and exercise and sleep and avoiding pesticides and avoiding plastics in our foods. Just tens of thousands of papers every single year. But what goes into the guidelines, which are created by professional organizations like the American Diabetes Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, who are funded by things like processed food companies, pharmaceutical companies, and then, of course, in the case of the ADA, people like Coca-Cola and Cadbury. So, people will always say
Cadbury, the chocolate
company, has
funded
millions for the American Diabetes Association.
Now,
so
come on,
absolutely, this is just.
I just want to say, because I don't want to ever sound judgy or pretend that I have good eating habits, because demonstrably I don't. They make great chocolate bars. Sure. They're awesome. But
they shouldn't be probably influencing our diabetes guidelines, right? I mean,
is that real? You're sure that's true?
I am certain that is true. We could all.
And Anheuser-Busch shouldn't be funding, Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just like these companies should exist.
But we follow this cult of evidence-based medicine, right? Which is that we follow the guidelines, but the guidelines cherry pick research from the canon of scientific literature that's out there, which is why when I was in medical school, there were just huge swaths of the science that I wasn't seeing.
But so can I just ask a very fundamental question? Why would we follow the guidelines rather than the outcomes?
It's a great question.
So you just said 5 minutes ago, you were outlining this terrifying and sad and catastrophic series of stats describing the total collapse of public health in the United States. Right. And so who cares what the guidelines are? Doesn't anyone just sort of zoom out for a second and be like, all these kids have diabetes, which leads to dementia. Like this is not working.
Right.
Did no one say that?
Well, the question, it's not working, is the question I would basically put in front of every doctor in America. Like if you're not looking around you and just scratching your head and saying, what the hell is going on? Then you are profiting off of this crisis, and I want the most dangerous thing you can do in America right now, obviously, is ask the question, why? So, I understand. About anything. But, this is just a point to kind of answer your question about why is this happening? Why aren't we following outcomes? It's institutionalized to not actually focus on outcomes because the business model of the healthcare system is volume. It's how many patients can you see, not what their outcomes are. We are paid for volume, not outcomes. Now,
did you see that as a surgeon?
I'm going, yeah. So absolutely. I mean, it's how many chart notes can you write and bill every day? That's why doctors are seeing 30 to 40 patients a day with 15 different diagnoses for each one. Obviously, you can't help that patient thrive and get healthier. All you can do is write the prescription because we are paid for volume. And the unofficial mantra of all
doctors must know that.
All doctors know. The unofficial mantra of private practice medicine is you eat what you kill, which means you get paid, you eat for how much volume you can do, how many surgeries you can sell, how many people you can get through in and out of your office. Now, back in when Obamacare was coming about, they were, which was really an utter failure. There was lip service that was paid to this idea of value-based care, okay, which sounds great on paper, right? So value is good outcomes over lower cost. This sounds great. We'll get paid more as doctors if we have better outcomes over lower cost. What is the highest value intervention you can do for a patient? Get them to eat healthy. Doesn't cost a lot, has incredible outcomes universally, right? Get them to sleep, get them to exercise. We would have moved towards that. But even that was corrupted by corporate interests because how the doctor had to report on quality was through these metrics called MIPS, basically, merit-based incentive little criteria. And most of them were based on how many of their patients were medicated. So instead of a doctor having to report quality as, I have a patient who got better, who got healthier,
which we expect,
it was how much of the patient population was on long-term medication. So the actual good outcome was defined by medication adherence in a practice rather than is the patient reversed of their disease. Every disease it
wasn't the actual outcome.
It wasn't the outcome. The outcome ended up being how many of the patients took meds. So even with lip service to good outcomes, it's not a healthier cell, it's a medicated patient. Those are two different things. We did not learn that in medical school.
But can I ask you, again, I don't want to get too personal, but what about the doctors that you were trained with or served under who trained you? I'm sure a lot of them are good people. I know all of them are smart. Yes. The things that you're describing would be pretty easy for anyone with an IQ over 80 to notice.
Right.
They not notice this? What is that?
There's several aspects to it. I think that because med school is funded by pharma, when I was at Stanford Medical School, we got a $3 million grant from Pfizer to revise our curriculum and you can look up the articles from this time. It was around 2011. The grant was with no strings attached. They had no control over what the curriculum development was going to be. But, if you're accepting $3 million from Pfizer, of course it's going to have an influence on what we're learning.
The dean received consulting payments as well.
Actually?
Yeah. The dean during her time, Philip Pizzo, was a pain specialist. Pfizer was one of the largest opioid makers, and he received direct consulting payments from opioid makers. And that year that they received that Pfizer grant, he was appointed, which I was actually involved with. I was working for Pharma at the time, to an NIH panel to make opioid guidance with the burgeoning crisis. He selected that panel. How can you have a more prestigious person than the Dean of Stanford Med School? 9 out of the 19 people he selected were directly paid for with consulting payments from opioid companies. And that panel in 2011, 2012 recommended more relaxed opioid standards and said that the idea of addictiveness was overblown and led to an increase of the curve in opioid deaths. And, we're talking a lot about the opioid crisis right now. J.D. Vance is talking about it, which is just, destroying Appalachia and large parts of America. What people don't, I think, realize is that the majority of opioid overdose deaths started with a legal prescription.
Yes, that's right.
So that's how it works. So I was actually helping.
It's sort of hard to hear that and not, again, one doesn't want to be judgmental. However, that seems like criminal behavior to me. Here's something you may not have known. Back in 2015, the Congress of the United States repealed something called the Country of Origin Labeling Act. Now, why is this relevant to you?
Well, it means, among other things, that when you buy beef at the supermarket that says made in the USA, it may not actually be. In fact, it could be, likely is, from a foreign country. It means that repackaging foreign meat can be enough to get the made in USA designation. It's a lie. It's an absolute lie. Most people don't even know what's happening. So how can you be sure that the meat you're eating is from the United States and has been raised with the highest quality standards and is the tastiest? It's truly made here. Well, it's simple. You can go to our friends at Merriweather Farms. Merriweather Farms is an American small business. It's based in Riverton, Wyoming. We know the people who run it, and they're great people. And they have great meat. They ship the highest quality meat, raised free from growth hormones and antibiotics, directly to your doorstep. It's delicious. We eat it a lot, including at this table. These are Americans. These are American-made products. And because they're cutting out the grocery store middlemen, their prices are actually cheaper, 10 to 30% cheaper for the best meat. They're the real deal. Again, we eat that meat at this table from Riverton, Wyoming. They're the best. MerriweatherFarms.com. Use the discount code TUCKER and you get an extra 10% off. Again, that's Merriweather Farms, MERIWETHER, farms.com/Tucker. It's worth it.
You know, for the doctors, all the education is just targeted towards having you just have one hammer, right? You have one hammer, which is your prescription pad and your surgery. You don't have any other tools in your toolbox, right? Because from the very beginning, from the very way that we're even taught about the body, it has been corrupted, right? It's rotten. It's rotten the way that it's wrong biologically how we're thinking about the body. But you even look at the med school curriculum.
Can you tell us really quick how?
Well, in the sense that we don't learn they're not 80% of medical schools don't have a single class on nutrition, and yet food is the cause of 9 out of 10 leading causes of death in the United States.
So you were saying, but even to zoom out a little farther, you were saying at breakfast, you put it so well. Of course, I can't remember it exactly. You were saying that medical education disconnects the body into its components, but doesn't address it as a connected thing.
So this is the point that's going to potentially create insolvency in our economy and ruin us as a species. Is this exact point? Right? It's
not that the stakes are high.
Is that we have convinced people and doctors that the body is 100 separate parts. The body is one system, one unified system, obviously. Something happening in your toe can affect everywhere else in the body. And yet we have essentially brainwashed people and doctors to believe that specialization is king, right? What is the most prestigious doctor, right? It's someone who is hyper sub-specialized.
Yes.
We basically diminish the value of primary care and pediatrics, these general specialties, yet someone who's a neuro-otologist is like at the peak of the
What is
ladder.
that?
It's literally someone who did my residency, so 5 years of head and neck surgery residency, and then two additional years just focusing on 2 square inches of the ear to focus on the ear, basically, and do surgery of the ear. That is the Dean of Stanford. Right now, the Dean of Stanford Medical School is a neuro-otologist. So the more specialized you get, the more prestigious you get. And what this does is it creates a system in which we actually start to see the body as 100 different separate parts, and we lose sight of how all of these things are connected. We lose sight of the research that's telling us how all these diseases are connected, that the diabetes that's happening all over your body, actually, we know that type 2 diabetes greatly increases our risk for hearing loss. But a neurotologist doesn't really want to think about that. They want to operate on the ear, right? And so you lose sight of the connections, and you get a patient in 15 different specialist offices. So many Americans are going through this right now, where you go to the primary care doctor with 10 issues and you end up with 10 different referrals to different specialists. And no one has any education, time, or financial incentive to think about how all those diseases are related. So what you do is you have specialists reacting to the symptoms happening in different parts of the body rather than anyone understanding how to think about how it's all connected, which when you go down that road, when you start asking why, you realize it is extremely, extremely simple, that all aspects of modern American society are rigged against the American patient to get us, addicted to food, allegiant to pharma, and just spending 10 hours a day on our phones, addicted. And now we are all sick. Our bodies are breaking, and it's leading to all these organ-specific symptoms that are related to a very simple root cause.
Can I just press you just a tiny bit?
Sure.
I hate this.
I know.
Why did you come to that conclusion and none of your colleagues did? I think it's really important to understand why certain people see obvious truths while everyone else is, including smart people, are blinded to them. What about you allowed you to connect these pretty obvious dots?
Parenting.
How? What did your parents do?
My parents. Our parents focused on incentives. Incentives are everything. Incentives are why Americans are sick right now. If we change the incentives, we'd get healthy in 2 years. Our country would be the most competitive country in the world. My parents' incentive in our family was to ask questions, not to have any stars or marks or anything, So what was celebrated in our family was sitting down at the dinner table in DC and asking questions and poking at ideas. We were celebrated for thinking about things in a bigger picture. That is not, you talked about this with Tim Dillon on your recent podcast, the boomers, they just want the stars for their kids, to get all these little badges. But that was not what was celebrated. My parents didn't
We
care.
developed our own compulsion to climb up the ladder, but it was always instilled ask
add
questions.
value,
And
ask questions,
we never
think
felt
for yourself.
actually like our parents were that happy with rising up. It was like, are we being good people? Ask. And that was really instilled in us.
Did they have a moral, explicit moral center? Like this is right.
I
This
think
is wrong?
they were very spiritual people.
Yeah.
We were raised with spirituality. We were reading, sacred texts and the Bible and Rumi and Ayn Rand and all these different things from a young age, discussing it at the dinner table, thinking about philosophy. And so that was what was celebrated.
So they were not conformists.
When I quit my surgical residency in my 5th and final year, after hundreds of thousands of dollars in my education, my parents threw me a party. They were asked.
No way.
They came.
No parent would do that.
No parent. They were, and they never told me to quit.
Hundreds
but
of thousands of debt.
Absolutely. They were so proud of me for coming to my own conclusions and seeing it. And there's a lot of...
Even though, so the incentive for parents, at least in DC where I raised my children, is to tell people in your neighborhood, your friends, that you have a daughter who's a Stanford
They
educated
never pushed
doctor.
us to go to Stanford. They never pushed us to I never once, ever in our entire childhood, they said, you need to go to your college counseling meeting, ever. They were about having fun and thinking. We were, they were older parents too. My parents were in their 40s when they had us. They'd lived lives. They were not living through us. They were spiritually grounded. They're not afraid of death. They aren't driven by the materialism that just makes you rack up a wall full of, awards. It was about
you're making me emotional.
Yeah.
Sound like wonderful
That is
people.
the reason. Yeah, that is the reason. And I mean, there's privilege involved in it too, of course. Like we had financial backstop. A lot of my friends going to medicine, they were supporting their families, right? And I have so much respect for that. And the fact that people's options are limited, but doctors are in a trap. It's $500,000 of education. You have this guaranteed salary and all you have to do is drink the Kool-Aid. All you have to do is stay heads down and not ask questions, not ask why. And you can really feel good about your work, right? People are sick as hell in this country, and we do need people to be doing heart surgery or else people will die. But the thing that is so imperative for people to understand is that the reasons we're having surgery, the reasons why we're getting sick, the reasons why American competitiveness is plummeting, the reasons why our kids are chronically ill, half of the kids in America are chronically ill, are all from preventable issues. So if you're a doctor who's not spending any time on focusing on that, then unfortunately, for better or worse, you are bankrolling on the problem.
Do you remember when Elon...
I honestly think you're going to change the world. I mean that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just had to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Oh, no, sorry. It's just your description of your parents is,
It brings me to tears.
Oh my gosh.
I cannot wait to have children. There is no greater role. There is no greater role in this world. And, I was sold such a bill of lies, like climb the medical ladder, become the chair of an institution. I can think of no greater thing that we can do than have children and keep them healthy.
Yes.
Right. And I just, up until a couple of years ago, I didn't even want to have children because I thought it was a liability to this value system of just like rise the ranks, make money. But I don't think there's anything more important we could be doing than creating healthy children who are thinking for themselves, who are eating healthy food. And I cannot wait for that role. And I think it's a spiritual corruption of our society right now that we have forgotten that this is the most important thing that we can do. It's unbelievable how far off we are. And I think it is deeply a spiritual crisis because we have lost sight of what really matters in our lives.
Man, you were singing my song and much better than I ever could. So that is, sorry. So completely carried away. So I guess now is the time, since we're talking about your parents, tell us, and your brother and I have talked about this at some length. I know this is painful, but about your mother, her illness, how that affected what you're doing now.
Our mother was our best friend. This book is dedicated to her. And, I think my mom, she's sort of the archetypal American patient, and she's someone who was totally faithful to the American healthcare system. And like so many other Americans, was ultimately completely let down by it. She passed away far too early after 40 years of completely missed warning signs of the root causes of all the different symptoms and conditions she was racking up. So, she had me when she was 40. I was a humongous baby born at Sibley Hospital. I was almost 12 pounds. Calley was almost 12 pounds. And that's a huge baby. And, there's actually a term for a baby over 8.5 pounds, which is fetal macrosomia, which portends metabolic issues in a mother and metabolic issues in the baby. And I had them. I was 210 pounds by the time I was in 8th grade, and my mom had trouble losing the baby weight, had a very tough menopause, in her 60s, got all the American diagnoses: high cholesterol, they gave her a statin; high blood pressure, they gave her an ACE inhibitor; high blood sugar, they gave her metformin. Oh, this is normal. It's a rite of passage. Every American's getting these diseases. So she went to all the specialists. She went to the cardiologist and the endocrinologist and her primary care doctor, got all these medications. And then, she's 72 years old, doing everything the doctors are telling her to do, taking the pills every single day. And she gets a diagnosis of, she had some belly pain one day, went to the doctor. It lasted for a few weeks. She got a CT scan, stage 4 widely metastatic pancreatic cancer. She was dead 13 days later. Ugh. And she was seen at the best hospitals in the country. She was getting executive physicals at Mayo. She was being seen at Stanford and Palo Alto Medical Foundation. And they looked at us in the eye. They looked at us after her death and said, "Oh my God, this is so unlucky." And I knew enough at that time to know there was nothing unlucky about this. This was an entirely predictable sequence of events from the age of 40 to the age of 72.
She had, as you've suggested, I think, every possible advantage. Like, clearly high-functioning person who followed the guidance, had the means to do it, had a daughter with specialty knowledge, a physician daughter. So, like, she had every possible advantage.
Did every single thing they said and died at 72 in the prime of her life from conditions that were on the exact same spectrum. So every condition I mentioned earlier in this episode and every condition she had are on this metabolic disease spectrum.
So you believe, pancreatic cancer specifically, if my memory serves, and I think it does, was kind of an unusual, it was always famously dangerous, deadly.
Skyrocketing.
I have noticed, like, all of a sudden, people
What are the risk factors? Obesity, diabetes, smoking. It is fundamentally a lifestyle disease.
Pancreatic
why
cancer
it is going up.
So is breast cancer.
Breast cancer. Breast cancer is now 1 in 8 women. This is often an estrogen.
It's a foodborne illness.
Estrogen-driven cancer. Well, where are all these extra estrogens coming from? Maybe it's the 6 billion pounds of pesticides that are being invisibly sprayed on all of our food and poisoning it. And what are these pesticides doing? They're estrogen receptor agonists. Interesting. Being sold to us from China and from Germany,
Which they're not using in their food there.
Illegal.
So what does that mean? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure the science is clear, because I don't really understand it. It's the effects of these chemicals on food is what?
So the ostensibly these chemicals are being used 6 billion pounds globally per year because of pest control. They're also being used on our children's parks and golf courses and all over the place. They're invisible, they're tasteless, and they are directly toxic to our cellular biology. So they're pesticides. Side is the word for the act of killing. So herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. And they are so toxic that 20% of all suicides globally are performed by drinking pesticides. And yet we're told by our government that they're totally safe. There's this one will shock you. But you look at, the largest merger ever done in Germany was Bayer Monsanto, where Bayer, which is a pharmaceutical company, merged with Monsanto, which is an agrochemical company in the United States. If you look at what Bayer makes, they make cancer drugs for things like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And if you look at what Monsanto makes, which is Roundup, which is the most widely used pesticide in America, the cancer that it causes is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They've paid out $11 billion in the past couple of years for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cases. So the companies are merging that are directly known to cause the disease with a medical company that has a treatment for the disease. Like, this is very, very dark. And so like Calley said, it's kind of this revolving door between create the illness, treat the illness, and hide the science that tells us what's happening.
But this is all result of the food industry wanting food cheaper. And we spend per capita half as much on food as they do in Europe. But we spend 3 times more per capita on healthcare. So my big point to everyone is this is not the free market at work. This is food companies lobbying to have neurotoxins and endocrine disrupting chemicals on our food that are toxic, that aren't allowed on any other food in any other developed country, in order to make food a lot cheaper. And then to your point about, what do these chemicals do? It increases estrogen. And these kids are inhaling hormone disrupting chemicals. So
and now
the New York Times recently had a front page article that puberty rates, particularly among women in the United States, are plummeting. People are hitting puberty years younger. Girls are hitting
how
puberty.
young?
The average girl in America is hitting puberty, which is sexual maturity, 6 years earlier than they were in 1900. We have the earliest puberty rates of any continent in the world. It's age 10 to 13. And this is in large part thought to do because of we're literally giving children estrogen with all the plastics we're ingesting, which are xenoestrogens, meaning they are exogenous artificial estrogens, and the pesticides, which can activate the estrogen receptors like atrazine. I mean, you can put atrazine, which is a pesticide that we spray about 70 million pounds of in the US every year. It's not legal in Europe, but it's sold to us from international countries.
It's not legal in Europe?
No, you cannot use it. And you put this on a developing male frog embryo and it turns into a female frog. That's how much of an an endocrine disrupting chemical that it is. And so these chemicals are not inert. And again, because we can cherry pick science, and so much of these these papers are PR papers paid for by industry. The Monsanto papers was a huge thing that, revelation. They had to declassify these documents that Monsanto had basically ghostwritten scientific papers to say that these chemicals are safe.
Wait, can I just ask an obvious question? So the incidence of transgenderism, or whatever we're calling it, have, skyrocket, thousands of % increase in the last 10 years. And there are many threads to this. It's partly a political movement, social movement, but you sort of wonder if it's not also a biological response to these chemicals. Is that possible?
I'll say this, just as a demonstrable fact, our child's environment is to an unprecedented degree full of hormone disrupting chemicals. The assault on a child's cells and hormones is unrelenting right now.
Unrelenting. And their bodies are small. They can't handle it. So you take a child and you put them on a screen the average kid is using a screen 7 hours a day. Okay. And so this is hitting their dopamine. So that's one input. We're eating a credit card's worth of plastic per week, right? And these are hormone disrupting chemicals. All of our
How
food
are we eating plastic in that volume?
Well, plastics are in everything now. They're in our air. There are nanoparticles of plastic in the air we're breathing. They're in our water. They're covering every piece of food that we buy in the grocery store. You go to Europe, all the vegetables are just, they're just in these free markets, they're not packaged. In the US, you go to Trader Joe's, every single piece of food is covered in plastic. You've got the plastic water bottles, every single can that we drink in the United States is lined with a plastic coating, every single one. It's all getting in. And this can actually directly disrupt our mitochondrial function, which is the metabolic machinery of the cell. So microplastics actually can disrupt the way we make energy in the body. And we know that metabolic issues are the root cause of every chronic illness facing Americans today. You can't make this up, And then you have there's many effects of these things, but endocrine disrupting and mitochondrial disruption are two of the really big ones. Then you've got the kids eating 70% of their calories that a child is eating today is from a factory, industrially manufactured, ultra-processed foods. We know that these foods are destroying our cellular biology. So it's really, and with school start times, kids are not getting enough sleep. So across sleep, across movement, the average kid is spending less time outdoors than a prisoner in America right now. Like kids are not going outside. We're not getting the sunshine. Our circadian rhythms are destroyed. So every level of society, public school start times are disrupting our food, our nutrients, our sleep, our stress and dopamine, our movement patterns, and our toxins. And we are getting destroyed.
And this is the visible hand. And we just have to understand this when we're thinking about healthcare policy. There's nothing more profitable than a sick child, as I said, or really hijacking a kid's dopamine, right? Think about the trillions of dollars that are generated from a child's dopamine being hacked, being on that phone all day. It's neither good nor bad necessarily. It's just an economic fact. There's a huge incentive for that kid to be, their chronic stress to be just triggered nonstop on that phone. There's huge profit for a child to be addicted to ultra-processed food and continuing to demand from their parents that food. There's huge incentive for a child to be sick and getting on the statins, which are doubled in prescription rates in high schools in the past 10 years, to get on the SSRIs that are now handed out like candy in high schools, to get on the metformin, to get on the Ozempic, which is now being recommended. They're pushing for 6 years old and up for if your child is overweight, lifetime prescription Ozempic. That's very profitable. So you have basically the free market at work. I think capitalism is the greatest invention in human history, but just looking agnostically at the incentives, it's as many pills as we can give that kid, as much we can keep that kid in fear, as much as we can keep that kid sick without dying right away. That's what's fueling the largest industries in the country.
Most of us, well, actually all of us, go through our daily lives using all sorts of, quote, free technology without paying attention to why it's, quote, free. Who's paying for this and how? Think about it for a minute. Think about your free email account, the free messenger system used to chat with your friends, the free weather app or game app you open up and never think about. It's all free. But is it? No, it's not free. These companies aren't developing expensive products and just giving them to you because they love you. They're doing it because their programs take all your information. They hoover up your data, private, personal data, and sell it to data brokers and the government. And all of those people who are not your friends are very interested in manipulating you and your personal political and financial decisions. It's scary as hell. And it's happening out in the open without anybody saying anything about it. This is a huge problem. And we've been talking about this problem to our friend Eric Prince for years. Someone needs to fix this. And he and his partners have. And now we're partners with them. And their company is called Unplugged. It's not a software company. It's a hardware company. They actually make a phone. The phone is called Unplugged. And it's more than that. The purpose of the phone is to protect you from having your life stolen, your data stolen. It's designed from a privacy-first perspective. It's got an operating system that they made. It's called Messenger and other apps that help you take charge of your personal data and prevent it from getting passed around to data brokers and government agencies that will use it to manipulate you. Unplugged's commitment is to its customers. They will promise you, and they mean it, that your data are not being sold or monetized or shared with anyone. From basics like its custom Libertas operating system, which they wrote, which is designed from the very first day to keep your personal data on your device. It also has, believe it or not, a true on-off switch that shuts off the power. It actually disconnects your battery and ensures that your microphone and your camera are turned off completely when you want them to be. So they're not spying on you in, say, your bedroom, which your iPhone is. That's a fact. So it is a great way, one of the few ways to actually protect yourself from big tech and big government, to reclaim your personal privacy. Without privacy, there is no freedom. The Unplugged phone, you can get a $25 discount when you use the code TUCKER at the checkout. So go to unplugged.com/Tucker to get yours today. Highly recommended.
Let me just ask, there's so many, this could go on 10 hours. Let's just stop with Ozempic really quick, because Ozempic, and you and I had a pretty remarkable conversation about Ozempic. And at the end of it, I thought, well, that's never going to be popular because that's kind of terrifying. I was wrong as usual. And now it is ubiquitous. Kids are taking it. College students are taking it. As a physician, what's your view of Ozempic?
I think it's very dark. I think it's a stranglehold on the U.S. population, almost like solidifying this idea that there is a magic pill. I mean, literally, the book by Johann Ari is called Magic Pill, and convincing us that salvation from our chronic health issues is going to be found in a shot, when we are living in a toxic stew that's destroying our cellular biology. It's, of course, for certain patients, taking GLP-1 agonists is going to be helpful for their conditions. It might jumpstart their way to getting back to health.
Is that the name of the active drug?
GLP-1 agonists. Yeah. So GLP-1.
Sorry, not fluent in this.
No. It's that's what the medications are. And so they're basically stimulating a hormone that's made in our digestive system that cues satiety and does many other things. And so,
satiety is
making us feel full. Making us, and what's so interesting, like we are like Calley said earlier, like we are the only species in the world that has an obesity and chronic disease epidemic. The only species in the world that has a chronic disease and obesity epidemic because of ultra-processed food. You think about every other animal in the wild, they're eating real natural foods, except for domesticated animals, which are also getting chronic diseases just like humans because they're eating our food. But every other animal, they're able to regulate their satiety. They're not eating themselves to death like we are. We're literally eating ourselves to death. The reason is because these foods, like Calley talked about with the cigarette companies and the scientists moving to create addictive ultra-processed foods, they are designed to subvert our satiety mechanisms like GLP-1 secretion so that we never know that we're full. But if we were eating whole, real food, we would cue the exquisite satiety mechanisms in our bodies and we would not overeat. If you're eating real, whole, unprocessed, nutrient-rich foods, we have receptors in our gut that make us feel full. It's not rocket science. You almost can't.
If you eat just protein, which is hard.
Can't overeat.
You cannot overeat.
No, that's right.
You can't eat too much steak. It's not even possible.
And think about this. It's incredible. If you can convince people that this is not true, and defy the entire animal kingdom, what's happening with every other animal, this could be on track to be the most profitable medication ever in human history. It will be if the powers that be let it. And the unfortunate part is that it doesn't take our bodies out of the toxic stew that's crushing our biology. Yes, we may melt some fat, but we're essentially creating starvation to melt fat and muscle without changing any of the other levers that we just talked about that are crushing our biology. So this is not the public health solution. You look at what's happening though.
Do you think there are potential downsides to it?
I mean, every medication has downsides. And this one has well-known side effects. It disproportionately causes us to lose muscle mass, which creates frailty, which is one of the things that can cause people in old age to have very poor quality of life and early death. It has a higher rate of thyroid cancer. It has risks on the label of kidney dysfunction, of pancreatitis, of all sorts of things. Every medication has side effects. So if we're going to mass prescribe this, so there's a bill right now in Congress, HR 4818, which is the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. And, you look at this and you think, oh, this is great. The government's focusing more on obesity and this is awesome. There's one line that matters in that, which is that they want to expand Medicare access to include coverage for for obesity medications, which are these drugs, for people that include overweight and obese. That is 74% of the American population. If this bill goes through and everyone who is eligible for this drug gets it paid by taxpayers, that will represent over $3 trillion per year in drugs to the American people without changing any of the root causes of what is making us sick. And to add insult to injury, this will be taxpayer money being largely funneled to Europe, who makes the drug. So people need
which they don't prescribe. And it's 10 times less expensive, and it's not the standard of care in Norway when you are obese.
Is that where it's made?
Yeah.
Novo Nordisk.
Yeah, there's a step ladder and you get the keto diet and exercise incentivized from the government.
In the country that makes Ozempic.
And the American Academy of Pediatrics in their most recent obesity guidelines are recommending these drugs for kids as young as 12.
And pushing for 6.
This is a lifelong medication at the cost of about $1,500 a month with many side effects that does not change any of the root cause issues that are toxifying, literally destroying our brains and bodies.
Can I ask, I mean, as you've said 3 times, and I hope you'll say it 3 more, every drug has side effects, but they seem like intentionally downplayed in a lot of cases. Most famously with certain COVID-related medicines, but there are others where they just don't really want to talk about. Doctors don't seem to want to talk about the potential side effects. Why is that?
Because if you have an obese patient,
weird.
Okay, so let me just paint the picture. They're pushing for 6, obese or overweight.
6 years old.
Yeah. So we have obviously an obesity crisis among 6-year-olds right now in the country. In Japan, the childhood obesity rate is 3%. In the United States, 50%
This is uniquely American.
50% of teens are overweight or obese. So let's just look at that, right? We're clearly just force feeding into our children toxic food that's causing this massive issue. And now any parent watching, particularly lower income, because this bill is pushing for Medicaid. So if you're a lower income, so why are they lobbying? Why is this company in Scandinavia one of the 5 largest lobbying spenders in America and pushing so hard for this? And why is the stock so high and it's the 12th most valuable company in the world? They're expecting 80 to 90% of their profits from the United States, from the government, by rigging the institution. What institution are pharma companies rigging? They're actually rigging Medicaid. They're actually profiting off poor people. Medicaid is spending more on mitochondrial dysfunction than the entire US defense budget and growing much faster, right? This is a
mitochondrial dysfunction.
Various metabolic
issues
this
tied
core
to
cellular dysfunction.
Diabetes. We're spending on Medicaid more on preventable metabolic chronic conditions than the defense budget. And Medicaid's one of the fastest growing items in the budget. That's all rigged by pharma as a piggy bank. So this bill, if you put Ozempic on that schedule, then any lower income 6-year-old, the doctor can say, I've got Harvard studies here saying that obesity is genetic. It's not your child's fault. Let's get them a lifetime jabs.
Well, if it's genetic, why didn't it exist 100 years ago?
Good question. But Harvard and the NIH and the American Academy of Pediatrics is saying it's a brain disease, it's genetic. And on 60 Minutes, as we talked about, a leading Harvard physician, Fatima Cody Stanford, said that throw willpower out the window. This is a genetic condition. And it's actually, she said, an affront and classist and racist to suggest it's anything other than genetic. So that's the message being told from the medical system. You ask why? Because the second you can get that 6-year-old on a lifetime injection, and let's just take this to every drug, it's the chronic disease treadmill. They're told that injection is a savior, right? And then the government, it's the largest line item in our budget. It's going to bankrupt the country. It's growing faster than any other line item in the budget, right? And Medicaid, the government is going to pay for that lower income kid $1,500 a month because the government also has to just pay the sticker price. Right? We're paying, our sticker price is 10 times more expensive than Germany. So the second you get something on the Medicaid schedule, then all lower income people are open season. And what's so criminal about this, and what's so representative of why this is a problem, is that the medical system is saying, they're saying it's a social justice issue, it's a moral issue. We have to pay $1,500 for 74% of US adults who are overweight or obese per month. That we have to find the money. The stock is the 12th most valuable company in the world. I have expectation that the US is going to say that. But where is that urgency from the medical system about why this stuff is happening in the first place, why it's not happening in Japan? Where's the urgency on saying, hey parents, maybe we shouldn't feed our kids toxic food. Maybe we should be looking at the root cause of obesity. And so this is the key point. Forget any public policy. The medical leadership should just say the truth. They should explain why there's an obesity crisis among children. It's not a Ozempic deficiency. It's because of very simple inputs to our metabolic environment and frankly, a rigged system where our food has been compromised. There's nothing conservative or liberal about our food system being compromised.
I couldn't agree more. It's not.
The medical system, before any public policy, should simply state that. And a key point in America is that we listen to our medical leaders. We changed our diet when the food pyramid came out. Smoking rates plummeted when the Surgeon General report came out.
The majority of Americans got the COVID vaccine.
When Dr. Fauci said, get the vax, most people, we respect and listen, but medical providers, they actually literally have social justice components where they're actually not able to recommend natural food because there's a component in the USDA nutrition guidelines which takes into account social justice. So they're worried about affordability.
May I ask what does that mean? So it's racist to eat non-poisonous food?
In America, it is classist and racist to suggest that mothers shouldn't be poisoning their kids. Yes, that is what the USDA argues.
So it seems like yet another example. There are so many of them, and you've talked about them when you were lobbying for Coke, of the richest people in the society, the ones who are looting the society, using issues like racism or sexism or classism as cudgels to beat back criticism of their looting.
Right. The NAACP is a registered lobbyist for Ozempic today.
The part that makes us scratch our head is like, how are we so delusional that we think it is easier to inject a child weekly for life than find a way to get that child healthy food. Like that is the track that we're on right now. That is insane, but we're believing it. We're drinking that Kool-Aid. It doesn't make any sense. We could take these dollars so simply, so easily, and funnel them towards healthier diet and lifestyle. $3 trillion a year. We could feed every single American family with organic food for $3 trillion a year. But instead, we're taking those healthcare dollars and steering them towards drugs, which doesn't fix the root cause issue.
Our message isn't drug or anti-drug. It's just like, let's look at the problem. Like say you're just an alien that came down from space. You look at America, kids and adults are just overwhelmingly metabolic dysfunctional, obese, diabetic. It's like you'd never say, like, let's have this keep happening and then jab everyone and drug everyone and manage the condition. It was just never, it's just follow the science. Maybe drugs actually do come into play there, but the history of chronic disease medications has been a complete disaster. We always say, if you have a gunshot wound, an emergency surgical need that's going to kill you right away, complicated childbirth, infection, 100%. The medical system is a miracle.
Acute issues.
Chronic disease medications didn't exist before 1960. The first one was the birth control pill, the first pill that you took for more than a couple of weeks that didn't cure the issue right away, ever. So in 1960, 0% of the medical budget was on chronic conditions. Well, we can talk about that. But 0% was chronic conditions. Today, 95% of spending is on chronic conditions. Because what the system realized is that they can take the trust engendered after World War II with antibiotics and various medical innovations that helped win that war, and then steer it towards chronic conditions. So by the 1970s, 30% of women in the United States were on Valium, a highly addictive drug.
Physically addictive.
Yeah. And it's just been a battle to shift the medical system to chronic disease.
Can we just go to the pill really quick? And I just want to say up front that, I'm Protestant. I've never had a problem with birth control, never thought about it, but at all. So that's my position, or has been my position, which is actually radically changing as we speak. But I've always felt that way. So I never really thought about it, but I always noticed that you were not allowed to criticize the pill. Period. Like that was not allowed in the world I grew up in. You could have all kinds of kooky opinions. You cannot criticize the birth control pill. And now I feel like maybe we were played a little bit. Why you're laughing sardonically?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak as a physician, but I can also just speak as a woman who has taken all these different medications because it's liberation. Yeah. It's liberation. Yes. We can do whatever we want, and who needs to get a period when you can, work in the hospital 100 hours a week and put off having, and then I freeze my eggs at 37 and have kids, So as a woman, I mean, I do think, of course, these drugs have helped in some ways, but we are prescribing them like candy. We're prescribing them for acne. We're prescribing them for PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, the leading cause of infertility in the United States, which is a metabolic issue driven by our food, and how the food interacts with genetics. And then, of course, for birth control. So you've got these medications that are literally shutting down the hormones in the female body that create this cyclical life-giving nature of women. We basically told women these hormones don't matter. Your ability to create the most miracle of any miracles, which is create life, just shut it down. There's no impacts. That's crazy to me. And as I've woken up from this, I realized like your cycle and having these hormonal cycles is part and parcel with our health in every possible way, and also with the miracle of creating life. And so for years, you just lose the biofeedback of what's happening with your cycle. It is one of the key barometers of female health. How is your cycle doing? Is it regular? Is it heavy? And we just shut it down and say there's no repercussions for that, which I think gets to a larger issue, which is a disrespect of life, right?
Yes.
It's a disrespect of things that create life. And I think about, you've got the pill and it just goes hand in hand with the rise. And this is going to seem a little far out there, but like it goes rise and rhyme with the hand of industrial agriculture, the spraying of these pesticides, the things that give life in this world, which are women and soil. We have tried to dominate and shut down the cycles. We have lost respect for life, which again gets to the spiritual crisis.
Keep going. I love this.
And I think
you are speaking truth right now.
For the sake of efficiency, right? For this delusion of short-term gains, for yields, for profit. But what we need to realize is that we live in an interdependent ecosystem that has to be harmonious, not dominated, which means gentler, and so by taking a hammer to women's hormones, taking a hammer to pests, what we've done is we are destroying the things that give us life in this country. And that is why that is, I think, part of the root cause of why things feel so dark right now, because it's bigger than all of this. We are actually turning our back on life.
Does it surprise you that all of this happened within 20 years of developing the atom bomb?
No. And I mean, speaking of that, I think it's really interesting to think about the relationship between war and what's happening.
100%.
So where did all these pesticides that have destroyed our life-giving soil and are creating a fragile food system, which is going to create a food crisis at some point, where did they all come from? Nazi Germany, right? So Hitler was developing chemicals of war and trying to create agriculture solutions to create more food yields for Germany. And some of these pesticides, these organophosphate chemicals, were turned directly into sprays that we're putting on all our food. The interrelationship between Nazi Germany and what's being sprayed on every piece of food in the United States is deeply linked, and we need to think about that.
Right.
15% of
one other thing I just want to say, this is being federally subsidized by the government through the farm bills. We haven't spoken about the farm bills, but you think about this funneling of money that's happening and how the government in a way is working against us. And I don't think it's nefarious at all. I think people just don't understand. We've talked to so many Congress people. They just don't understand the health effects of all these things that are happening, of the processed foods. And, everyone likes their Oreos. So it's a tough issue because we're addicted. But the farm bills are making all these unhealthy foods cheaper. They federally subsidize commodity crops, which are turned into processed food. So this is the corn, the soy, the wheat, making these foods artificially cheaper. So this is why, people say, this is where the social justice piece comes into it. It is, in many ways, it is much harder as a poor American to buy food that is not poisoned because our government is making the poisoned food cheaper. What is happening? We don't even...
It's not a free market.
It's not a free market at work. This is not a free market. It's rigged. It's rigged against poor people. And so there's nothing conservative about what's happening.
And totally President Trump is calling this out.
Yes.
RFK is obviously calling this out. But calling out a rigged market is not an attack on the free market. Like, we need to speak truth here, particularly when it's impacting human capital.
Well, calling out a rigged market is a call for a free market.
It's imperative.
That's right.
And working for these companies, we actually used to use that argument. You rig the market and then yell nanny state whenever anyone questions the rigged market. And the fact that there's more agriculture subsidies that go to tobacco than fruits and vegetables. 0.4% of agriculture subsidies go to fruits and vegetables. 2% goes to tobacco, 90% goes to ultra-processed food, and it's highly slanted against small farmers. This gets dark. I mean, talking about the Nazis, 15% of...
Well, I mean, it's just, I do think it's not accidental that was a regime based on occult practices that hated Christianity and whose signature act, which no one ever seems to remember, it was murdering hundreds of thousands of Germans in hospitals through euthanasia, so-called mercy killing of kids and adults who were substandard.
Yes.
And so, does it surprise you that atomic weapons and poison pesticides both came from that regime? No, not really.
Well, also,
Sorry, that's just all true. So they always tell you it's the most important election of your lifetime, but of course, this one actually is. That's demonstrable. And it's also, because it is so important, being censored at every level by the tech companies. So we were thinking about this a couple of months ago, and we thought, why not get on the road live in front of actual people, live audiences, coast to coast, a nationwide tour where we can't be censored? That'd be good. It would also be fun. So we're doing it. We're going to be on stage with some of our friends, some of the most fascinating people we know, the most recognizable people we know, responding to what is happening in America this September in real time. It'll be just like the podcast, but it's going to be live. So we're excited to announce our friend Larry Elder is coming to join us in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our friend John Rich will be there with us in Sunrise, Florida. We're adding more stops. We just added another stadium show in Reading, Pennsylvania. We'll be joined on stage by Alex Jones. They tell you what Alex Jones is like. Have you seen him in person? You should. Make up your own mind. It's going to be fun as hell and interesting and intense, and we hope you will join us. Go to tuckercarlson.com right now to get your tickets. See you there.
Today, 15% of high schoolers are on Adderall. Adderall was created by Nazi Germany. So there's a great book called Blitzed about this, but Merck developed the precursor to Adderall in order to give to German soldiers. So they got one pill a day. And actually it was discontinued by the end of the war because there was such psychosis among the German soldiers taking this every day. It was to make them more aggressive. They actually reformulated it, Merck, and made a stronger version, and that is Adderall, which is now given to 15% of children, and this idea that, many parents watching, just as Ozempic's being pushed on their kids, just as SSRIs being pushed on their kids, just as SADs are being pushed on their kids, parents being cudgeled with medical studies saying they're putting their kid at risk for not following this medical guidance. They're also, if their kid is a little bit distracted, sitting in a sedentary environment with limited sunlight, being force-fed ultra-processed food, they're getting a little fidgety and they're prescribed Adderall right away. That's the standard of care, not even thinking about, think about any animal you put in a cage, low sunlight, sedentary, force-feeding ultra-processed food. So just as
prisoners,
just as a societal level here, we're really committing mass child abuse in many ways, and we're normalizing that, and we're not speaking out about that, and then we're giving people stimulants developed by Nazi Germany. I mean, it's kind of crazy. That's much more profitable. I mean, from a pure economic standpoint, getting a kid off of this treadmill costs millions of dollars. A diabetic person on Medicaid, if they're diabetic by the time they're 30, they're getting millions of dollars. They're generating millions of dollars paid for by the government to pharmaceutical and healthcare companies. Millions of dollars. If you train a lower income person, and talk to them about metabolic health, frankly, reading the principles Casey talks about in the book, and they're going on a path of thriving, of understanding with their family what they're putting into their bodies of movement. They're costing the system millions of dollars. That's how the kind of economic reality of how the system works. That's kind of the battle. Getting to your point about how people let this happen on doctors, I think the brilliance of the systemic design is the most revered people in our society are basically able to keep up this system. They're able to have their fancy studies that really just take responsibility for managing the disease instead of curing, right? They censor. I had a call when I attacked the dean of Tufts Nutrition School. The most prominent nutrition researcher in the country, Dariush Mozaffarian, he called me and actually threatened to call Stanford, where we both went. And he said, we know the same people at Stanford. This is not right to be upsetting the apple cart. And I said, well, does your school not take the majority of its funding from food companies to impact nutrition policies in the United States? He said, of course we do, but that doesn't impact my judgment. And the fact that you're calling that out and the fact that you're questioning the study that we conducted with the NIH that said Lucky Charms were healthier than beef. The fact that you're calling this out really isn't polite. This isn't how it works, Calley. And we know the same people at Stanford, and this isn't polite. I'm going to call Stanford and basically threatening me to be kicked out of the club. That's how this works.
And then these studies are used to create, influence the USDA guidelines. 95% of people on the USDA nutrition guidelines for America 2020 and 2025 had a conflict of interest with food companies. These studies are used to influence what the USDA is basically saying can go in school lunches. The USDA controls the U.S. school lunch program, which serves 3 billion meals per year to students. It's the largest fast food chain in America is the USDA school lunch program. And, just this past year, Kraft Heinz is brokering deals with the USDA to put Lunchables in schools.
It's the top growth area for Kraft. Is
what's a Lunchable?
It's the
plastic
processed plastic squares with crackers,
cheese and crackers. That's going to be the school lunches, and these corporate deals are happening. And it's studies like this that then
I'm assuming Lunchables are suboptimal.
They're suboptimal. You look at the ingredients. There's about 60 ingredients in these packages. There's no fruit, there's no vegetables. It's literally processed flour, processed sugar, processed oil. It's just these staples of the American ultra processed food system that are just rotting children's brains and bodies.
Would you believe today, and I think this is one of the most criminal that we talk about what we can change. Today, the USDA, which sets the standards that impact schools, that impact parents' perceptions, everything, they say that a healthy diet for a 2-year-old is up to 10% added sugar. They're recommending added sugar for 2-year-olds when we have a metabolic health crisis, a childhood obesity crisis, and where 33% of young adults now have prediabetes, which would have just been absolutely unthinkable. There's an assault on children's cells because of our food. Added sugar is a huge one. And the USDA recommends it. Imagine, and this is just, it's so simple. If medical leaders actually had courage, if we had the volume and the urgency of our medical community talking about the COVID vaccine, about the childhood chronic disease crisis, not banning sugar, not banning anything, but just from a medical perspective, saying it's probably a good idea to re-look at what we're feeding kids in the midst of a metabolic health crisis, and probably sugar should be discouraged. They don't say that right now. The USDA just put a report out saying a diet 93% in ultra-processed food for kids could be healthy. The USDA is doing marketing for ultra-processed food. They're not speaking in a clear voice because 95% of the advisors on the committee are corrupted. 40% of the advisors that President Biden has already put for the next committee are paid for by the maker of Ozempic. Why do we have a huge chunk of the USDA Nutrition Guideline Committee paid for by Ozempic? You'll have to unpack that one for me.
A foreign drug maker.
Yeah, and then you've got, Jason and Travis Calley doing brokering. You might have seen they're now endorsing a new cereal blend with General Mills, and every mainstream media outlet is with them basically laughing about how great this is. They're not talking about this metabolic disease epidemic that's destroying our children. They just turn a blind eye to any of the problematic nature of this because, of course, their ad funding comes from pharma and food.
Can I ask? So you all are focused on children, which is indisputably the right thing. But for people my age, maybe even your age, watching someone you love die from dementia, from Alzheimer's, universally regarded as the worst thing, just the worst thing. And it seems to me the incidence of dementia is like rising.
Yeah.
Am I imagining that? If it's true, why is it happening? What can be done?
It's going up rapidly. It's happening in younger people. We're seeing Alzheimer's in people as young as 50. There are no drugs that actually reverse the disease. There are no good drugs for Alzheimer's. And we know... Still, there are no drugs there's drugs that slightly slow the progression, but do nothing to reverse the disease. And research from top journals in the world, like The Lancet, have explicitly stated that it is modifiable lifestyle factors that drive the development of this disease. Things like healthy eating, smoking, and moving and exercise. These are the best possible way we could prevent Alzheimer's in this country is by people getting up and moving more, eating unprocessed organic food, and not smoking. And unfortunately, you never hear that, right? This is a large